Good afternoon. You can tell when it's 4 o'clock here because you hear the bell tolling. It's easy to tell. Thank you for being here for our third of 4 sessions on Mozart and his influence on later composers. We've been exploring both Mozart's music, some of which we heard in this past week, as well as music by composers who came after him, including we've heard music by Beethoven, Rossini, we've heard music by Chopin. Today we'll continue to hear some music of Mozart, including work featured on this Saturday's program, Piano Concerto, as well as music by Chopin, Tchaikovsky. We have a special guest performer later in the hour from ECHO, East Coast Chamber Orchestra. So it should be a great hour. I appreciate your being here and hope that we can continue to reflect together on why Mozart's music has such long-lasting influence. As I said in the first class and showed you some statistics, he is the most oft-performed composer in classical music today, exceeding even Beethoven. While Beethoven's name is often thought of as the top, Mozart actually, in some ways, has even more influence. So at this point, we've gone into some details of Mozart's music. We thought about how musical phrases are put together out of little pieces. The musical language Mozart inherited, almost by definition, consisted of little tiny pieces. 2, 3, maybe 4 notes at a time. A simple rhythm, a repeated note, a sighing figure, 2 notes together. Very simple little motives. And we've explored that a bit, and what really sets Mozart apart is how he not only creates those little motives, which honestly any of us could do. A repeated note, that's the simplest thing ever. But Mozart, in combination of these little pieces, is able to express something that feels real, that feels human, that feels emotional. And that's what we've been looking at, that's what we'll continue to explore today. Toward the end of class last time, I mentioned that although we appreciate Mozart greatly and build statues for him and have little balls of chocolate with his head on it, in his own lifetime and after his death, his music was criticized for having too many ideas. It was just too plentiful. And that's the criticism of Mozart that plagued his later years. You may know that Mozart, we don't even know for sure where he was buried because his fortunes had taken a dip toward the end of his life. Some of the criticism that he received really had an influence on how well his music was selling, or I should say how poorly it was selling at the time. I shared this criticism last time from a contemporary composer whose music was selling better at the time. And he said, well, yeah, Mozart's a genius, okay, yes. But he has too many ideas. He gives his hearers no time to breathe. As soon as one beautiful idea is grasped, it is succeeded by another, which drives the first one out of your mind. And at the end, you can't remember any of them. We can sort of chuckle at this now, but I think it's helpful to keep it in mind because in the 19th century, as music, say, of Mozart's successor, who idolized him, Beethoven, became more standard repertoire toward the middle of the 19th century. Mozart's music, which had suddenly seemed, as one critic put it, too spicy, now seemed the opposite to people. It seemed pure. It seemed completely natural. It had an aura of divinity about it. It was smooth. So that just shows us how, when times change, we hear music differently. People hear music differently. And that's probably true of us as well. Probably 30 years from now, they'll say, well, back in the 2020s, they heard music this way. And so we should realize that about our own ears, right? We listen relative to our own time and the music that's heard in our own time. So in the 19th century, where we're going to be picking up today, Mozart's music, again, seemed pure, it seemed beautiful, holy. It was like the epitome of perfection for the 19th century. And that's why we have these statues of Mozart with smooth surfaces and little cherubs flying around. But if we dig a little deeper than that, we find that it was Mozart's melodic sensibility that really impressed the younger generation of composers, including Chopin. And that's where I'd like to start today. Chopin and then later Tchaikovsky really picked up on Mozart's lyricism, his ability to create melodies that we instantly hear as if we were singing them with our own voice. They're vocal. They feel like they should be sung. And even if they're only sung in our minds, they give us the feeling, they resonate our body as if we were singing. And that was very interesting to composers in the 19th century, where melody became such a prominent and rich source for creativity and innovation. So I'd like to start with a piece by Mozart that is especially lyrical, that is especially songful, and take it apart a little bit and see what are the ingredients of it. Why does Mozart write such beautiful melodies? And then we'll move on to some later composers and see how they write melodies by comparison. What did they learn from Mozart? What did they pick up from him? So I'm going to start with a piece. I played a little fragment of it for you at the end of class last time, and I'd like to look at it in a little bit more detail this time. It's from his piano sonata in F major. It's one of his better known piano melodies, piano sonatas. It's a slow movement. And one thing I can point out, it's in a clear 4-bar phrase, which consists of a basic idea, an immediate repetition, a little bit altered, a continuation, and then there's a cadence. And that's a sign that, again, this is the sentence structure, not the period structure. The sentence structure usually has repetition almost right away. So if you hear a melody that repeats like almost immediately, that's a sign that it's probably a sentence and not a period. Don't worry about that for now. Let's think about the ingredients of why this music is lyrical and why it's singable, okay? The first thing I can see is that the harmony is extremely simple. And instead of writing chords underneath, Mozart writes 16th notes. And you can see in the lower staff here, they're just flowing along. Just flowing along. If I were to create a harmonic progression, just to play the chords that Mozart uses, it would sound something like this. These are the most basic chords in music. Every pop song uses the same chords. So there's nothing really that interesting about the chords themselves. They sound good on an in-tune piano. You can say that. Now, the first thing Mozart does, look at the left hand. Okay, so he breaks the chords apart into 16th notes, which sound like this. Now, why would that be useful? Well, what it helps the music do is to flow along. There's a feeling of going, right? Instead of walking with heavy steps, with chords, the music starts to float because it's all 16th notes and just one at a time. And what that ends up doing is it helps keep the melody aloft, or in the air, so to speak. And if the pianist kind of keeps those notes flowing, kind of keeps them moving just a little bit forward, it helps the melody kind of get up in the air and soar forward. Let me play a little bit of the melody. although the left hand may seem totally separate from the right hand, and it is, they don't do the same thing at all. The left hand is helping the right hand melody to stay afloat. Another thing Mozart does to help the melody continue is he uses these little notes, these little ornamentations. You can see them here and here. Now, why might he do that? Well, remember that the piano sound goes away, right? It does not stay like the voice, where you can keep the same tone consistently. The piano sound decays very quickly. Now, the modern grand piano can sustain better than Mozart's piano. Mozart's piano, actually, the decay is very fast in the sound. And so the ornaments actually give the illusion to the listener that the note is continuing, like the human voice. So instead of, which the piano does, it gives us the impression that the note is continuing. So that's very helpful for Mozart. And these ingredients help give the impression of songfulness, of singing. Before I start to ask questions, let's just look at the way he puts together the melody now. Okay? I've marked this as a basic idea. And within that basic idea, there is what musicians call an appoggiatura, which is two notes that are kind of like a sigh. And I've highlighted them here because Mozart uses them several times. There's a little bit of dissonance here. Now, we don't hear it as dissonant. It's not like Stravinsky, right? It's not like that. It's just a little bit of dissonance against the bass note, and then it resolves. So it feels like a kind of breathing quality. And he does that a few times. He starts here. And then he does it again. There it is. So again, Mozart's taken a very simple idea, just two notes, but he has integrated it into the whole phrase in a way that you don't really think about it when you hear it. You don't think, oh, there it is, oh, there it is. You could do that, but you don't have to. You kind of know it instinctively. It makes sense to your ears. It makes you feel calm, like it's ordered, like it's put together in a way that just feels right. And that's one of Mozart's geniuses. Again, this is the basic idea. He repeats it and varies it a little bit, adds another ornament. Then he fragments it a bit, and it's in shorter pieces now, and even shorter, and then leads to a cadence. That is a sentence, a musical sentence. Now, after he does that, he's going to do it a second time. But this time, he has kind of a stroke of genius. And this is a little bit unusual for his time period. The second time he does it in minor, in a minor key. And suddenly it's as if a cloud passed over the sun, and you feel those darker thoughts creep in. In major. So what was once peaceful, songful, suddenly there's this leap, very dramatic leap. This is a musical jargon, is a minor ninth. It's a very dissonant interval. This comes from opera. The singer cries out in pain, leaps up high, the soprano, and then floats down, and then eventually comes all the way down at rest. And here, another stroke of genius, he ends the whole phrase, which has been in minor the entire time, with a major chord. That's what we call catharsis, right? After you go through suffering, you feel a sense of, combination of resignation and acceptance, maybe. This is all within the first 8 bars of the piece. Let me play, I'm going to play the movement for you in a moment. But let me first play the theme that follows. So after we've had this moment of dramatic intensity, Mozart turns more intimate and lighter. Again, there's a sense of relief. The music couldn't be more simple. It's just happy to go its way, very lightly, very tenderly. So now, if we think back over just these few bars that we've heard, Mozart has given us a songful melody, which is keeping in the air through the left-hand accompaniment. It's orderly, it's well put together, it's beautiful. There's a rising and a falling, which is natural for the voice, right? What goes up must come down. There's a cadence, a point of rest. Then the melody comes in minor, makes us wonder what's happening. It's anxious, it's troubled. There's a moment of crying out, the highest note, as I showed you, and then a drifting down, and we come back to major, and there's a sense of catharsis, understanding. So I've gone into some detail with this because I think this is an especially beautiful example of Mozart's lyricism. And later composers learned from this. We already saw some examples in this class, and we'll continue to see what Chopin does with Mozart's framework in just a moment. Before we do that, I thought I'd just play the movement for you. And maybe you can put yourself in Chopin's shoes. This is a young composer. He's going to start writing nocturnes, right? These beautiful lyrical pieces with melodies, somewhat similar to this, to be honest. A bit melancholy in character. And like this movement, it's all in almost one breath. The whole thing just continues from beginning to end. So we can kind of imagine the young Chopin playing through this music and trying to learn from it. And we'll see how he does that after I play it. And after I play, I'll be happy to take any questions. I forgot to mention one other thing. In the second half of the movement, he's going to repeat the same melody a second time. And we have a manuscript copy where Mozart wrote out ornamentation for the second version, which is different than the first. It's the kind of thing that Mozart usually did without writing it down. He just did something different the second time. We only have a few examples of Mozart deliberately writing it out, usually for a student or for his sister, who was also a wonderful pianist. Some say, basically as talented as Mozart, but didn't have the same opportunities that a boy would have. But she did not often feel comfortable ornamenting the way that he did, so he would sometimes write out things for her. So you might keep that in mind, because this is another area in which Chopin excelled, was in writing ornamentation and ornamenting a melody. So you can listen for that when the melody comes back the second time. So, I'm curious for any reactions you have so far to this music, and if you were imagining yourself in Chopin's shoes, what might have caught your interest? Yes. Sure. That's right. Mm-hmm.
So are you transposing it? Or?
No, I'm playing it in that key.
You were playing
B flat, yeah. That's
right. Why does it have a name?
Oh, I should have explained that. It's typical for Mozart if the first movement of the sonata is an F major, then the second one he usually puts up a fourth from the first key. So if it's an F major, up a fourth would be B flat. What that does is it allows the sound to be related to the home key, but gives the ear a little bit of relief from that F major sound world. So it's kind of like an excursion to another related place in town, and then for the last movement, you always go back to the home key of F major, if it's a 3-movement piece. So, yeah, no, it's a great question. Sometimes I take things like that for granted, but you're absolutely right. This is not in F major, this is in B flat major, and that's typical because it's the second movement, not the first. Yeah. Yes?
Chopin wrote it. I heard this. I would be very worried that I would be good as well.
Aha, yes. Yes, you know, Chopin was fortunate that he didn't live later in the 19th century when composers developed a real complex about that, about living up to predecessors. By the time Brahms came along, Brahms was extremely concerned with that. He said, I will never live up to my predecessors whose heels I follow and who constantly embarrass me. No, I disagree personally. Brahms is a great composer. But there really was a feeling later in the 19th century that these were almost mythological figures, Mozart and Beethoven. But in Chopin's time, they weren't so far away from his generation yet, and I think it was more like, oh, look at this wonderful music. I think I could do something along these lines. Does anybody hear anything in common with Chopin's music? For those of you have listened to some Chopin? Yes?
The section with very heavy minor.
Yes. Yes, I think you're right. Where the music becomes a little bit more intense, chromatic, that's where Chopin picked up on. And I thought I'd give you one quick example before we move on to a different topic. Here we are. Yeah. This is a famous nocturne by Chopin in E flat major, and lo and behold, he uses the exact same phrase structure as Mozart. He has a basic idea with 2 parts, a leap up, and then a 2-note figure coming down. Again, leap up, 2 notes coming down. That continues, and then is followed by a cadence. And in many respects, the overall effect of the music is pretty similar to Mozart's melody. It's emotionally different. It's more personal. It's more introspective. Mozart's seems more universal. This is the expression of one individual, namely Chopin. And when we play it, we step into his shoes and kind of live into that individuality in the time that we take, in the tone that we try to get, in the flexibility within the rhythm. But I think we can still see that there's an aura of Mozart left in this music. Yes, it's influenced by bel canto opera, which is a whole other area, but it was really Rossini who invented bel canto opera using the same ideas from Mozart, just sort of elongating them and elevating them and ornamenting them. So there's a very clear progression from Mozart's music into the 19th century. I'd like to take a break from Mozart and from Chopin, rather, and just turn for a moment to another area of influence, which is his concertos. This Saturday, we're going to hear Mozart's concerto in A major, his earlier concerto in A major for piano and strings. 19th century composers really picked up on Mozart's idea of the concerto, where the soloist is a kind of protagonist. You might also almost think of it like a novel, where you've got the main character. And the main character in a concerto, at least in the Mozart concerto, is the soloist. And the soloist or character goes on adventures. And we get to follow along with those adventures. Now, what is an adventure in music? I think it's worth asking as we're about to hear a concerto. I would say the adventure is not so much the theme itself. The theme is the theme. The theme, as we've learned, has a clear phrase structure, it comes to rest at a cadence. It feels like it exists standing in one place. Starts and ends in the same key, cadence. Where the soloist brings us on adventures is often through either modulation, which means moving to a different key. Again, like going to a different place, like walking to a new place and having a new adventure over here in F major instead of in B flat major, for example, in the concerto we're about to hear. Beyond that, the concerto soloist often has lots of what's called figuration. So those would be the fast notes you can hear when a performer's playing. I'm playing violin right now, but a pianist will do the same thing. Lots of activity is happening. That's those episodes. We really, actually, in music, we use the word episode. It's just the same word you use in a novel. There's a little episode in the plot, or the TV show, for example. The soloist takes us on those adventures. There are moments of danger or difficulty. The key changes. We go to an unexpected place. Often Mozart consolidates that in the hands of the soloist, not in the orchestra. The orchestra usually plays themes in one key and stays in one key, whereas the soloist is the one leading us on this adventure. So I'd like to explore that quality a little bit with you today. And since we have our performer here, I see, I don't want to keep her waiting anymore. She's been busily rehearsing all day today with the East Coast Chamber Orchestra. Please welcome Min Young Kim. That's great. And this is Min Young. First of all, thank you for being here and joining us. Min Young has performed at the festival before, and not only with Echo, she's also a member of the Skaneateles string quartet, which has been here at least twice before. So we're really happy to have you back, and thank you for playing for us today. This is an early concerto by Mozart. I think he was like 17, roughly, around that when he composed it, in a phase when he was writing a few concertos for violin, which he played himself, presumably. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the unwritten part of this movement, which you wrote yourself, and what that is, and how that came about.
I'm going to play premiere for you today. I just wrote this last night. It's a cadenza for this movement. So usually in a concerto, especially a classical concerto, you have a cadenza at the end of the movement where the soloist gets to kind of have fun, almost improvising. Some people do improvise that. I may improvise unintentionally. Commentary, sort of like, you know, what if I did this with the piece? I could try this, or I could, again, doing lots of episodes, sequences, just putting a little spin on Mozart in your own way. So I've actually never played this concerto, but I'm performing it in November. So when Aaron asked me if I had Mozart, I was like, oh good, I need to learn this. This is a good opportunity to have just a little bit of pressure, you know, people listening who are curious and interested. And I had written a cadenza in college. When I was studying, I did an independent project in college where I was studying Mozart piano concerti the cadenzas that Mozart wrote, and then trying to write some cadenzas of my own for the violin concerti, sort of inspired by what he writes. He wrote amazing cadenzas for his concerti. So it's inspired by that, but I looked at it and I was like, what is this? I don't like this. So I had to rewrite it last night. So hopefully you'll hear the melodies, and I'm actually quite fond of it, but I hope I just play it correctly.
I'm sure it will be great. Just before we play, just a couple brief words about the piece and the concerto in general. Let's see. The beginning of this piece, you're going to hear first the orchestra, which in this case is just me. Well, actually, Min might play along with me. Yeah. So Min and I will be the orchestra together at the beginning, okay? And we're going to play some of the main themes of the movement, but the movement's going to stay in just the home key to start. And then when Min comes in, that's where it gets interesting. That's where it starts to become more of an adventure. Eventually, she's going to lead a modulation into the new key area, and then by the end of the first section, things are going to get more and more exciting. You'll see her leaping up, her part's on the top staff there, and don't worry if you don't read music, but you can see it goes way up, and then it comes way down, and then it goes way up, goes way down, and then it goes way up again, comes down, goes all the way up into the stratosphere, and then ends with a trill. And that's a common thing in Mozart's time. When you get to the end of a section, you have a trill. And that just means very fast notes, 2 notes very quickly, and then it ends with a cadence. That's it, exactly. Yeah. So you can listen for that. That's kind of a marker that we've gotten to the most exciting point, and then we're coming to a rest in the new key, in the new place where we've arrived at. And we're going to see later composers pick up this kind of model as well. So we'll go ahead and play. Thank you so much, man, for doing that and sharing this. I was interested too because I didn't know where the cadenza was going to end. I thought, oh, I hope I come in the right spot. Yeah. Well.
I wrote something hard.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Do we have any questions for Min before we move on? Yes, Ada.
Yes, just an easy one probably. I was watching your feet, I didn't see you touch the change pedal. I think that's a paper score on your...
Oh, yeah, I did use the pedal occasionally, but I wrote the cadenza on with pencil. So it's really illegible, actually.
I have the impression that most of this you just know.
I mean, I learned it this weekend, but yes, I'm getting to know it. Yeah, I'm trying to make it big. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for playing, Min. So in the time remaining, I'd like to follow up a little bit on this idea that Mozart's concerto model influenced later composers. We're going to hear a little bit of music by Tchaikovsky. Before we do that, I just wanted to point out that Mozart's concertos were often a vehicle for his own performances. In fact, he tried publishing some of them. In fact, he tried publishing the one you're going to hear on Saturday in Vienna, and he didn't sell any copies. He tried publishing ads in all the local papers, he put up posters, and nobody wanted to buy his concertos, and he couldn't figure out why until it dawned on him that people didn't want to play his concertos, they wanted to hear him play his concertos. So that's what he did. In Vienna, he organized performances in the 1780s for himself. He rented the hall. Actually, it was in the building on the right here. The Trachtenhof. You can see, well, the original building was demolished, but there's a new building in its place. This is right in the center of Vienna. Anybody who's been to Vienna in the center, this is the view from the Stephansdom, the big church, right in the center. And anyways, he rented the space, he hired the players for the orchestra. He actually had the tickets printed himself. Here's one of the tickets, probably worth a lot of money now. He went around to all of the people he knew. In fact, he wrote a list of all the people he invited for his father because he was very proud that all these people bought tickets to the concert. He wrote the music, he played the music, he improvised cadenzas, like you heard Min doing. He did all of that himself. So when I say that music has a spirit of adventure, I think that the whole enterprise had a spirit of adventure for Mozart. It was financially risky, it was something new for Viennese audiences, but it was extremely successful and really quite a musical adventure, maybe the great musical adventure of his life other than opera, other than writing operas. So later composers in the 19th century, when they looked at Mozart's concertos or played Mozart's concertos, they saw a path forward for their own concertos. And if you look at almost any 19th century concerto by Chopin, by Liszt, well, Liszt is a little bit different, even including up to and including Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, they all wrote concertos essentially on the Mozartian model, which was generally 3 movements, 1, 2, 3, so fast, slow, fast, with very, very similar musical structures, where again, the soloist is the one who does the modulation, who has the brilliant figuration, who's the charismatic character of the story. So they really did pick up on Mozart's ideas there. Now, Tchaikovsky I turned to because he was very open about his influence from Mozart. In fact, he called Mozart, quote, a musical Christ. That's pretty clear, I guess you could say. He had his revelation about Mozart hearing the opera Don Giovanni. And Don Giovanni, as we've already seen in previous classes, supplanted the magic flute as the opera that everyone in the late 19th century went to and was just blown away by. In the 18th century, they couldn't understand it. Beethoven thought it was terrible. Like, why is he writing an opera about this terrible guy who goes around doing terrible stuff? But in the 19th century, composers started to gravitate toward Don Giovanni, including Tchaikovsky. Here he is reflecting about hearing the opera at age 16. He said, "It was a pure revelation to me. It is impossible for me to describe the enthusiasm, delight, and intoxication which I was seized by. During several weeks, I did nothing but play this opera through from the piano score. Even as I fell asleep, I could not part with this divine music." Notice the use of that word, right? That Mozart is this kind of deity now. That's coming into the thinking of the late 19th century. "Which pursued me long into my happy dreams. Among the great masters, Mozart is the one to whom I feel most attracted. It has been so ever since that day, and it will always be like that." That's pretty clear. And he goes on about Don Giovanni, and we don't have to read all this, but he says, "It is to Mozart that I am obliged for the fact that I have dedicated my life to music. He gave the first impulse to my musical powers and made me love music more than anything else in the world." Now, here's a different comment that he wrote in the year that he wrote his violin concerto, and we're going to hear a little excerpt of that to close today. He's writing to his patroness, with whom he was very close. He exchanged lots of letters. And he says, "As a man of my times, I am broken and morally sick. So I like to seek peace and consolation in Mozart's music, most of which is an expression of life's joys as experienced by a healthy, wholesome nature, not corrupted by introspection." This is interesting. I think Tchaikovsky here is referring to the Romantic generation's proclivity toward inwardness and toward sort of wallowing in one's own misery, so to speak. That was typical of Romanticism in general. And I think he's drawing a comparison between what seems to be the purity of Mozart's music, the universality of it, compared to the individuality or introspective nature of Romanticism. And I'm giving you this quote, not only because it refers to Mozart, but because I think we can hear in Tchaikovsky's music both elements. You're going to hear pure, beautiful melodies, which are very Mozartian in character. And there also is introspection, anxiety, inwardness, freedom, and those things are balanced in the music. So I'd like to, while you have that Mozart violin concerto in your ears, turn a little bit to the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, and we'll hear the opening melody. Once again, like we saw with Chopin, Tchaikovsky not only learned lyricism from Mozart, how to keep a melody sounding vocal, like you could sing it, but he actually constructs the melody in the same way Mozart does, with a little motive. It's a repeated note, and then 5 more notes with 16ths here. Then again the repeated note, and the more 16ths. Then it continues like this, and then it leads toward a cadence and a resting point. Now the difference here, which you'll hear, is that he leads into it with a big improvisation, so to speak, by the violin alone. The violin's just doing, we don't know what, just thinking, just free associating, let's say. It sounds that way. And then you can see the orchestra is resting, and then the orchestra comes into the melody. And then at the end of the melody, the violin does that again. It just wanders and wanders, looking for something, thinking. And then again, the orchestra comes in with the melody. So there's both this freedom and this organization within Tchaikovsky's music. So let's hear this excerpt, and then we can have a little final discussion and questions you might have. I'm going to attempt to play a video performance of this, which is given by the violinist Hilary Hahn. Ever heard of her? She's of course been to Skaneateles many times in this dear, dear friend here. Let's see, how can I get this to work? Just one moment, we'll try to get the video on the screen for you. There we go. Okay. So I've skipped the first minute of music in the concerto. You're going to hear the orchestra is going to build up a little bit, and then Hilary's going to come in with this sort of improvisation, very much in the Romantic style. And then you'll hear the melody come in that I just showed you with the orchestra together, this sort of Mozartian, beautiful, pure melody. So a little taste of what Hilary's been up to lately. I have a dream that maybe she'll play it here someday. We can hope, right? So we'll try to make that happen, but in the meantime, you get to hear it this way. So you hear that melody, the very pure melody. We can follow it easily. It's well organized, lyrical, songful. And in between you have these moments of freedom, this free sort of improvisation in the Romantic style around those melodies. So that's just a taste of what Tchaikovsky took from Mozart. As we conclude, and we're about to go have a glass of wine together, I don't want to delay that too much, but I am curious whether any of you have any thoughts, reflections, or questions you might want to ask or share. Yes?
I love hearing about Tchaikovsky because I don't know Tchaikovsky's existence without a ballet.
Yes, right, we think of Swan Lake, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I picked a violin concerto because we heard one of Mozart's violin concertos, so I thought it might be useful. But you can find many Mozartian melodies in his ballets as well. So that would be a topic for another day if we had more time. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes?
When you're playing up there with your iPad and the music changes pages, how do you do that?
It's a technical question. How do I turn pages with the iPad without swiping with my finger? I'm using a fourth pedal. It's a plastic Bluetooth pedal. So I'm used to tapping my foot when the page turns. It takes some getting used to because usually your feet are occupied with the other pedals, so then you have to add another one. It's a little bit of juggling, foot juggling, so to speak. Yes?
I was really interested in your comment about the body becoming
Yes.
with the development. And I wonder, it seems to be the 19th century, and I'm coming from the world literature, they were villains. The 19th century was like, but you had to do something with the extremes.
Yes.
The innocence and the innocence and evil.
You're,
And I wonder if that has something to do with the way composers like Tchaikovsky
Yes. Yeah, you bring up an excellent point. Maybe next week we can go into this. You're absolutely right. Don Giovanni fascinated the 19th century partially as a villain, but as somebody who seemed to contain within him both the forces of good and evil combined. E.T.A. Hoffman wrote a very influential essay about this, and he tried to solve the question of how can there be a great opera about such a terrible person? And he explained that he has within him, Don Giovanni, the conflict between divine and demonic forces. The Don claimed the right to live. He was driven by an unquenchable yearning, and that's a very romantic notion, that we're driven by this inner yearning that carries us along, that coursed unceasingly through his veins, etc. So he's making him into a romantic archetype, Don Giovanni. And this was very influential to Franz Liszt, who wrote a piano fantasy called Reminiscences of Don Giovanni. And I'd like to play a little bit of that for you maybe next week, because we don't have time now. But Liszt picks up on the divine and the demonic. It was very influential to him. So thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes?
Just a request.
Sure.
Can you post the YouTube link for the Hillary Hahn
Sure.
when you...
Sure. I'm happy to send that to you. And I had hoped to go into a little bit the piano concerto, which we'll hear on Saturday. I didn't quite get to that, but I can also share a link to that as well. So, anyone else? Okay, well the wine is waiting for us. So if you have other questions, you can just come talk to me. Thank you. See you next week.